Access revoked. Leave immediately.
Dad, why are they making us leave?
Sometimes good people lose things they didn't deserve to lose.
My daddy always says helping people is the right thing. Did he do something bad?
No, sweetheart, we don't let someone else's decision change who we are.
Then,
We'll be okay? As long as
She was 58 years old, on her knees on a floor she had paid for, scrubbing another man's wine out of marble she had chosen herself, and she did not say a single word. That was the part nobody could believe afterwards. She had every reason in the world to speak. She chose the silence instead. Rain moved down the glass in long, crooked lines, 40 floors above a city that had already gone home. There was laughter somewhere above her head, the loose, expensive laughter of men who had eaten well, and it came in waves, and each wave landed on the back of her neck. 9:14 on a Tuesday night. A yellow bucket with one bad wheel. A gray uniform with someone else's name stitched over the pocket. And a man in a suit that cost more than her crew earned in a month, standing over her with a glass in his hand, talking about her the way you would talk about a piece of equipment. He said, 40,000 of her. She's the cheapest software we own. There is more to that moment. There is what he did with his hand, and what he put in her bucket, and what happened to the room afterwards. And we will get there, because you need to see all of it. But hold that one sentence for now, because everything that follows grew out of it. Here is what that man did not know as he said it. He had 11 days left to sign the deal of his life, the deal that would make his name permanent in that city. And the woman with the mop owned every floor beneath his feet, including the one he was standing on. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. 9 days earlier, 90 miles north of that building, a woman named Denise Whitaker sat at a kitchen table with a letter in her hands and could not make her thumb break the seal. The house sat on a lake, and at that hour the lake was the color of nickel, flat and cold, and giving nothing back. February in North Carolina has a particular meanness to it, a wet, patient cold that gets into the joints of a house and stays. Denise had the heat running and a blanket over her shoulders, and her hands were still cold. She had been sitting there since 4 in the morning because sleep had stopped visiting her some years back, and she had quit chasing it. The kitchen was too big. That was the truth she never said out loud. 12 chairs at a table for a woman who ate standing at the counter. A boat under a tarpaulin at the end of a dock she had not walked to in 3 summers. She had chosen the tiles in that kitchen herself in 2011, going back and forth for a fortnight between 2 shades of cream, because Raymond kept saying he could not tell the difference. And she kept saying that was because he was a man who had eaten lunch out of a cooler for 11 years and had no business being consulted about tile. Raymond had been dead since October of 2015. In the corner of that kitchen, beside the pantry door, there was a stack of paper that came up past her knee. Board minutes, quarterly statements, compliance summaries. Every one of them addressed to her. Every one of them still in the envelope. She had signed the consent forms as they arrived, because a woman came out from the law office with a folder and a pen and pointed at the line, and Denise put her name where the finger was, and then the paper went on the stack. 11 years of that. If you want to understand what happened on the 40th floor of that tower, you have to understand the stack of paper first. It was not laziness. Grief does not always look like weeping. Sometimes it looks like a woman who cannot open her own mail. The letter in her hands was different because it had not come by courier. It had come to a post office box in Mooresville that only 3 living people knew existed, and there had been 2 before it. The first had arrived in January, 1 page, blue ballpoint, handwriting that leaned hard to the right. The second came 2 weeks later with a photograph clipped to it. It was a pay slip, photographed badly with a flash, so the top corner was washed out white. Gross pay for 2 weeks of night work came to $491 and change. And underneath the taxes, underneath the insurance line, there was a deduction Denise had never seen in her life, in a company she had built with her own 2 hands, and the deduction was labeled shrinkage recovery, and the amount taken from that woman was $41. $41. Denise had sat with a pencil that night and worked out what $41 was as a fraction, and then she had put the pencil down and gone out onto the deck in her housecoat in 28 degrees and stood in the dark until she stopped shaking. She opened the third letter. It was shorter than the others, and whoever wrote it was frightened by then, and you could see the fright in the letters themselves, the way the loops had gone tight and small. It said the deduction was on every crew in 3 states now. It said night shifts had been cut so thin that people were working whole buildings alone, and that a woman on a hospital contract in Greensboro had fallen off a wet ramp at 2 in the morning and lay there until the 6 o'clock guard found her. It said anybody who complained got moved to a shift that made childcare impossible, and after 2 months of that they quit on their own, and the company recorded it as voluntary separation. The last line was 6 words long. Somebody has to still be there. There was no name. There never was. But there was a phrase in that letter that Denise read 3 times, and the 3rd time she stood up out of the chair. The phrase was "Nobody cleans alone after midnight." Because that was not a slogan. That was Rule 11. Out of a handbook a man named Raymond Whitaker had typed himself, on a Smith Corona, in 1993, sitting on an upturned crate in a storage unit off Freedom Drive, with a sandwich going stale beside him. Nobody cleans alone after midnight. Not for any contract, not for any money. And if a client asks for it, you tell them the price. And if they will not pay the price, you walk away from the account. Raymond had walked away from 3 accounts over that rule in the 90s, when walking away from 3 accounts nearly finished them. Somebody down there still knew Rule 11. Somebody down there was quoting a dead man to a post office box, and Denise Whitaker sat in her kitchen and understood that she had been hiding for 11 years while something was being taken apart piece by piece in her husband's name. She met Naomi Bishop for breakfast the next morning at a diner off the highway that had been there since Carter was president. Naomi ordered eggs and then did not touch them, which was how you knew Naomi Bishop was worried. They had met in 1979, both of them 19, working the counter at a dry cleaners on Beatty's Ford Road, and Naomi had informed her on the 2nd day that she was going to be a lawyer, in a tone that made arguments seem foolish. 47 years later, Naomi was the attorney who administered the Whitaker Trust, and she was the only living soul apart from a records clerk in Delaware who could have told you who actually owned Meridian Grove Services. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting once, which for her was tremendous discipline. Then she set down her coffee and said, "So you send auditors. Auditors report to the board. Then send lawyers. Mine, not theirs. And a woman on a night crew in Greensboro is going to tell your lawyer the truth about her supervisor while her supervisor stands there deciding her hours for next month." Naomi looked at her a long moment. A truck went past outside and rattled the window in its frame. "Say the rest of it. Whatever it is, say it in this booth, because you cannot say it anywhere else. I want to work a shift." What Naomi said to that took some minutes. The heart of it was that Denise was 58 with 2 rebuilt knees, that she was majority owner of a corporation 9 days from the biggest transaction in its history, and that if she was seen in that building in a uniform, the story would not be about wage theft. It would be about a rich, grieving widow playing dress up, and every reporter in the country would run it that way, and the people she said she wanted to help would be the punchline. "I know how it looks," Denise said. "Do you know how it feels? Because I sat with you in that hospital corridor." Denise did not answer for a while. Then she said it quietly, looking at the ketchup bottle. "The last time I trusted paper, my husband died on a landing between 2 floors of his own building, and nobody came for 2 hours." Naomi Bishop closed her eyes. Then she opened her purse and took out a pen and started writing on the back of a receipt, because that was the only way she had ever known how to love anybody. It took 2 days to build a woman who did not exist, and it did not take much, which tells you something about the company itself. Meridian Grove hired night crews through a subcontracting arm, and the subcontracting arm hired through a staffing office in a strip mall in Gastonia, and the staffing office wanted a number, a phone, and a warm body that could pass a drug test. There had been a woman named Dolores Turner who worked for the company from 1997 to 2003 and died in Rock Hill in 2019, and whose file had never been closed out. Naomi Bishop, who had done a great many careful legal things in her life, did one thing that was not. That is how D. Turner came to be issued badge number 40118. Denise drove down on the Sunday evening in the property manager's Corolla, a 2009 with 190,000 miles on it, and a crack across the windscreen shaped like a lightning strike. She rented a room by the week in a house off Beatty's Ford 4 blocks from where the dry cleaners used to be, from a landlady who asked no questions. She took off both rings, and could not make herself put them in a drawer, so she threaded them onto a bootlace and tied it round her neck under the collar of a gray polyester shirt. She looked at herself in a mirror the size of a dinner plate, over a sink with a rust ring in it, and what she saw was not a stranger. What she saw was 1991. There had been a lot of years when this was the actual size of her life. She and Raymond had started Meridian Grove out of one van with a bad transmission and a name they picked because it sounded like it had been around longer than it had. They cleaned 2 office buildings and a Buick dealership on Independence, and the dealership was the one that mattered because it paid on the 5th like clockwork. In the summer of 1991, they slept in that van in a lot behind a shuttered bowling alley off Wilkinson Boulevard, windows cracked, a box fan running off the battery until the battery gave out. They ate out of a cooler. Bologna, mustard in a squeeze bottle, and a bag of peaches Raymond's mother sent up from Chester County in a paper sack that went soft at the bottom. Denise was 23 and had a bad tooth that whole summer and no money to fix it, and Raymond used to hold his hand against her jaw while she went asleep because he said his hand was warmer than a flannel. And he hummed, never the words, just 3 or 4 bars of blessed assurance, over and over, while he worked a buffer, while he ate, while he wrote invoices in longhand on a clipboard on the dashboard. She used to threaten him with the mop handle. He used to tell her that a man who is not humming is a man thinking about quitting. 35 years later, she buttoned a gray shirt in a rented room and hummed it herself and did not notice she was doing it. The tower on South Tryon was 40 floors of glass and dark stone with a lobby ceiling 50 feet high and a water feature that ran on a timer. Meridian Grove did not own it. Meridian Grove leased 11 floors and put its name on the outside. 39,000 people worked for that company across 31 states, and almost none of them had ever seen that lobby. They worked in hospitals in Ohio and airport terminals in Texas and county schools in Alabama. They mopped. They hauled trash. They scrubbed the grease traps the day people did not know existed. The company did not sell a product. It sold the labor of people whose names its own executives could not have produced under oath. The crew that cleaned the headquarters came in through a loading dock on the Church Street side at 9 at night and went out at 5 in the morning and used a service lift with a quilted pad on the wall and took their break in a room with no window on the 3rd level of the parking structure. Denise came in through that dock on the Monday night at 8:50, and the first thing that happened to her happened before she was through the door. There had been a brass plate on the wall beside that entrance, 12 inches by 18. Raymond had it made in 1996 when they took the lease and screwed it to that particular wall on purpose, because that was the door the crews came through, and he wanted the first thing a new hire saw to be the company's name in brass at eye height. It had said Meridian Grove Services, and underneath, in smaller letters, "This building is cleaned by people, not machines." He had been proud of that line. She had told him it was corny. He had put it on the plate anyway. The plate was gone. There were 4 filled screw holes painted over in a slightly wrong shade of gray, and in its place a vinyl decal off a printer roll that said Service Partner Entrance. All personnel must badge in. The bottom left corner had lifted and curled, and somebody had tried to press it back with a thumb, and the adhesive had gone gray with handprints. Denise Whitaker stood in the rain in front of a peeling sticker for 11 seconds. Then she badged in. "You're Turner." A woman on the dock with a clipboard and a styrofoam cup looked her up and down in about a second and a half. You ever run a burnisher? It's been a while. That's a no. Fine. You're on trash and restrooms with me. 30 through 35. And if you're slow, I'll tell you you're slow, because I would rather hurt your feelings at 10 o'clock than be here till 6. I'm Simone. Simone Carter was 34 years old, 5 feet 2, and moved through that building like weather. 9 years on that crew, which made her second longest serving on it. She was the lead, which meant she carried the clipboard, took the complaints, covered the shifts nobody wanted, and earned $1.40 an hour more than the people she led. She talked continuously and called everybody baby, including men in their 60s. She could pull a liner, tie it, drop a fresh one, and be moving to the next desk in under 4 seconds, 40 times a floor, without ever appearing to hurry. She gave Denise one rule in the lift, flat, with no explanation attached. Above 20, you don't look up. Anybody's still working, you don't say good evening, you don't say excuse me. You go around and come back for that row later. Why? Because they don't like it. Not all of them. But you can't tell which ones by looking, and the ones who don't like it write emails, and the emails come to me. That first night, Denise Whitaker cleaned 6 floors of restrooms in her own building and learned exactly how long 90 seconds is. That was the other rule. The service lift was old, and it was the only one the crews were permitted between 9 and 5, and there were 3 of them working 20 floors, and if you missed it, you waited. She watched Simone do arithmetic in her head all night, for floors of trash against one lift against a supervisor who counted rooms, and she thought about a proposal that had crossed her own desk in 2013 to give the night crew freight access after 10, and she could not for the life of her remember what had happened to it. At 1 in the morning, they took their break on level 3. Concrete, strip lighting, 2 vending machines, one out of order long enough that the sign had faded. 9 people. Denise sat and listened and said almost nothing, and in 40 minutes learned more about her own company than 11 years of minutes on a kitchen floor had ever told her. She learned that the crew on 36 through 40 had been 3 people until August and was now 1, and that the one was a man of 61 who wore a hernia belt. She learned that shrinkage recovery was called the tax by everybody, and that when you asked about it you were told it was in the handbook you signed, and that the handbook was 140 pages on a tablet screen in an orientation room in Gastonia. She learned that in 9 days the whole company was going to be listed on the stock exchange, and there would be a party in the lobby with a ribbon, and the crew had been asked to work a double to reset the lobby afterwards at straight time. "They gonna have shrimp," Simone said, not looking up from her phone. "Watch." Every one of them walking round holding a shrimp by the tail. At 2:40 Denise stood at a window on 34 with a mop in her hand and found that she was crying, and did not entirely know why. She wiped her face with her forearm because her gloves were filthy. Then she went and finished the row. She came back on the Tuesday, the 24th of February. She would remember the date for the rest of her life, and so would a great many other people, though most of them would remember it for a reason they got wrong. The mood on the dock was different. 2 men from a catering company were unloading rolling carts with cloth over them, a florist's van behind them, and Simone was on the phone with her jaw set. When she hung up, she said, "40's got an event, so we're doing 40 first, then dropping back down. Get the good bucket." "What's on 40? "Money. Investors. It's the roadshow thing before the thing." She said it the way you would describe the weather in a state you did not live in. Floor 40 of that tower is not offices. It is one room on the south and west sides with glass from carpet to ceiling, a corridor of white Carrara marble running its length, 8 interior offices, and a boardroom with a table cut from a single slab of walnut. Denise had chosen that marble in 2011 out of a sample book, sitting on the floor of a half-built shell with dust in her hair, and Raymond had said, and she could still hear him saying it, "Woman, that is a lot of money for a hallway." She was mopping it at 9 o'clock when the reception spilled out of the big room. 40 people, dark suits, waiters with trays, voices bouncing off the glass. Out in front of it all, holding the room the way a good preacher holds a room, was a tall man of about 40 in a navy suit with no tie, a glass of red wine in his left hand, walking backwards down the corridor because he was talking to 4 men who were following him. Marcus Vaughn was 43 and had been chief executive of Meridian Grove Services for 6 years. He was the son of Curtis Vaughn, who had been Raymond Whitaker's first employee in 1989 and his partner by 1994, and who had died in 2011. Marcus had gone to Chapel Hill on a scholarship and to Wharton on the company's money, and had come back into the business at 26 determined that nobody would ever say he was there because of his father. Revenue was up 60% under him. He knew the name of every regional director and the birthday of most of them. He was charming in a way that was not entirely false, which is the most effective kind. Denise had not seen him in the flesh in 9 years. She had her back half turned and her head down, and she understood in the 2 seconds before he spoke that she was as invisible as a fire extinguisher. That's the point I keep making, Marcus was saying. Everybody wants a technology story. There is no technology story. There's a labor story. We are the largest employer of unskilled labor in 11 states. And unskilled labor is the only input in America that has got cheaper in real terms for 30 years. One of the men said something about turnover. Turnover is a feature. Turnover means nobody's on the books long enough to vest anything. Then somebody behind him laughed at something else, and a woman turned, and her elbow met a waiter's tray, and a glass of red wine went over the edge of it and hit the marble 2 feet from where Denise stood. It made a sound like a slap. The wine went out across that white stone in the shape of an open hand and ran into the seam between 2 slabs and started traveling. The woman apologized too much. The waiter went down on one knee with a napkin, and Marcus Vaughn put a hand on the waiter's shoulder and said pleasantly, No, leave it. That's not your job." Then he turned and looked at Denise Whitaker for the first time in 9 years and said, "Ma'am, would you mind?" She got down on her knees on the marble. She could have gone for the wet vac 4 floors down and taken 7 minutes. What she did instead was what any woman on that crew would have done with 4 investors watching, which was drop to her knees with a cloth and work the wine out of the seam before it set. Because if it set in the seam, it was there for good, and the person who would hear about it in the morning was Simone. That is where it should have ended. A spill, a cleaner, 40 seconds. It ended a different way, and the reason it ended a different way is something Denise would not understand for another 9 days. And when she did understand it, it would nearly break her. Because Marcus Vaughn did not walk away. He gathered up his 4 bankers with a look, the way you gather people for a photograph, and said, "See, this is what I mean. This right here. You want the actual business? Not the deck. This." Somebody chuckled, unsure. 40,000 of her. In 31 states. She's the cheapest software we own. No license fee, no upgrade cycle, and she never once asked me for equity. The laughter that followed came half a second late, which is the sound of a room deciding to go along with something. Denise kept her eyes on the seam and kept moving the cloth. At the edge of her vision, she could see a pair of black patent shoes and the hem of a dark green dress by the window, turned away, facing the glass, and the hand holding that glass was not moving at all. Further back, near the door, a young woman in a gray blazer stood with a phone at her hip, screen lit. Marcus crouched down, easily, on the balls of his feet, close enough that she could smell the wine on him and the cedar in whatever he wore. He was smiling, and the smile was not cruel in the way people would later assume. That was the strange thing. It was worse than cruel. It was affectionate. It was the smile of a man being generous with something he had a limitless supply of. He took a folded 20 out of his trouser pocket and put it in the yellow bucket, on top of the gray water, where it darkened at one corner and began to sink. "Buy yourself something with a dream in it," he said. Then he clapped one of the bankers on the arm, and the whole group moved back down the corridor toward the light and the noise, and one of them was still laughing as the doors closed. Denise Whitaker stayed on her knees for 4 more minutes and finished the stain. She got the wine out of the seam and out of the grout on the west side where it had run, and went over the whole area twice with clean water, because a red wine ghost on white stone shows up under morning light, even when it is invisible under the lamps. And she was not going to have Simone Carter written up for a ghost. She fished the 20 out of the bucket with 2 fingers, squeezed the water out of it, folded it, and put it in her breast pocket. Then she stood up. Her right knee had gone, so she had to use the wall. She walked the length of that corridor past the glass wall of the big room where a man she had known since he was in a car seat stood with his back to her, telling a story with his hands. She got into the service lift and watched the numbers go down, and somewhere around 35 she reached up and took hold of the bootlace through her shirt and held the 2 rings on it in her fist hard enough to leave marks in her palm. Simone found her on 36, sitting on an upturned bucket in a dark closet with the door half open. Baby, I heard. It's fine. There had been no lawyer involved, Odessa said, because there had been no money for one, and no real expectation in that place and that decade that a black machinist's name would carry any weight on a patent filed alone. Walter had made a promise instead, spoken plainly between 2 men who considered each other friends at the time, that the mechanism would save the shop and that Isaiah's family would always be looked after because of it. The patent went forward under the name Calloway alone. The company survived, then grew, then became Calloway Precision Systems. The promise, Odessa said, was kept in fragments over the years and nowhere else. Not in any document that would hold up in a courtroom. Marcus asked what she meant by fragments, and Odessa answered without much emotion, the way a person recounts facts they have long since made peace with. Isaiah had been hired at odd moments over the years for work that never seemed to need advertising. Marcus himself had been hired straight out of trade school with no formal application process, a detail he had never once questioned because it had simply felt like good fortune at the time. Small checks had arrived some years around the holidays with no explanation attached, and they had stopped arriving entirely not long after Walter's health began to fail. Odessa said she had never gone looking for more than that, because going looking for more than that had never once felt safe for people like them. Marcus left his mother's house that night carrying the journal and the blue folder, and called Denise Whitaker the following morning, the first time he had asked her for anything since she'd reached out to him weeks earlier. He told her what he'd found. Denise, still working inside the company, and still carrying the discomfort that had never left her since his termination, offered to look through the oldest archived HR and legal records still on file, boxes from decades earlier that had never been fully digitized and rarely, if ever, got looked at by anyone still working there. It took Denise the better part of a week to find anything, working through the old records quietly, after hours, in a basement archive room nobody had reorganized in years. Most of what she found was ordinary, decades of routine paperwork that told her nothing. Then, misfiled inside a folder labeled with an unrelated employee's name, likely a clerical error from long before she'd ever started at the company, she found a single handwritten letter dated 1979, in handwriting she recognized immediately from old company documents bearing Walter Calloway's signature. The letter was addressed to no one in particular, more a private note to himself than a formal document, the kind of thing a man writes when he intends to keep a promise but has no lawyer present to make him keep it. In it, Walter acknowledged plainly that the indexing mechanism now saving his shop had been designed entirely by Isaiah Bell, and stated his intention to always take care of the Bell family in exchange for allowing the patent to move forward under the Calloway name alone. It was signed, dated, and never witnessed by anyone else, which was precisely why it had never mattered legally in the way it should have. Denise photographed the letter carefully before returning it to its folder, unwilling to risk removing an original document from company property, and brought the images to Marcus that same evening. He read it twice at his kitchen table, the same table where Zoe usually did her homework, and felt something shift in his chest that was not quite relief and not quite anger, but close to both at once. For the first time since the firing, he understood he was not simply an aggrieved former employee. He was standing on evidence of something the company itself had never fully settled, 45 years after the fact. Naomi Bishop's office sat above a hardware store on the quieter end of downtown Harlan Falls, and she read through the letter and the schematic twice before she said anything at all. When she finally spoke, she did not offer comfort. She offered facts, plainly, because that was the only version of help she believed in giving a client who needed to make a real decision. A verbal promise and an unwitnessed private letter, however damning, were not the same thing as an enforceable legal claim, especially across 45 years and one deceased party. Fighting it would mean a public, costly, uncertain legal battle against a company about to raise significant capital, with no guarantee of winning and every guarantee of being expensive in ways beyond money. At almost the same moment Marcus sat across from Naomi weighing that reality, an envelope arrived at his house from Calloway Precision Systems legal department, offering a modest settlement in exchange for his signature on a standard non-disclosure agreement regarding the circumstances of his termination. Isabel Reyes had authorized it days earlier, unaware that Marcus already held a copy of a letter that made her offer look less like generosity and more like an attempt to close a door she didn't yet know was already open. Marcus read the settlement papers twice at his kitchen table that night, a pen resting beside them, and left them unsigned when he finally went to bed. Simone Carter had been covering Calloway Precision Systems' upcoming public offering for the better part of 2 months, mostly routine business reporting, the kind of coverage nobody reads closely until something in the numbers stops making sense. What stopped making sense to her was a small, oddly worded disclosure buried deep in the company's draft prospectus. A single line referencing an unresolved intellectual property matter connected to a foundational patent, listed without further explanation. Prospectuses were supposed to disclose exactly this kind of thing in full. This one didn't, and that omission was its own kind of story. An anonymous tip reached her inbox not long after, and signed, containing only a name, a date, and a suggestion that she look into who actually built the Calloway indexing system back in 1979. Simone did not know yet that Denise Whitaker had sent it, careful to leave no trace of her own involvement, unwilling to risk her job outright, but unwilling to stay silent either. Simone began making calls to CPS's legal department, asking specific questions about patent history and IP disclosure, questions detailed enough to make it clear she already knew more than a routine reporter should. 3 times, which is insane. It's a P.O. box from 1996. It's probably a fish market now. She crunched a pretzel and her eyes were wet, and she was furious about it. And you know the worst part? For a month, I checked our post at the house to see if a fish market in Mooresville had written me back. Somebody has to still be there. That's what I put in the last one. Because here's what I've decided, D. There's nobody. There's no old man in an office anywhere who built this thing and cares about it. There's just Vaughn and the board and the tax. I made up a person in my head who'd read that letter and be angry. And that person is not real. And I need to quit that. Because Andre's got a school trip in April, and I need my head straight. Denise said, "Show me the plate." They went down at 3:30, and Simone shifted a filing cabinet. And there it was, face to the wall, standing on its edge with 30 years of dust on the top edge. Somebody had already polished a patch in the corner with a thumb, and Denise knew exactly whose thumb. She crouched on that concrete and read her husband's corny sentence and said out loud, "That is a lot of money for a hallway." What? Nothing. Leave it exactly where it is. She drove home at 5 with her hands steady for the first time in a week, and by the time she got to the boarding house, she had made the decision that ruined everything. Because she was still, underneath all of it, a woman who had been rich for 20 years, and rich people have a reflex, and the reflex is this: I will call somebody. She bought a prepaid phone at a filling station for $18 and rang Harold Greer at home. Harold was 70. He had been on the board since 1998. He had lent Raymond $11,000 in 1994 out of the proceeds of a rental duplex on Tuckasegee Road, and Raymond had paid him back in 14 months and given him a piece of the company on top of it, and Harold had never had to work again. He had been a pallbearer. He called her Sugar and had done since she was 30. He was delighted to hear from her. He said her name twice and asked about the lake and said his wife's hip was mending, and Denise sat in that car and listened to a man she trusted be warm to her, and then told him she wanted the listing put back 30 days and an independent payroll audit commissioned by the board and not by management. His voice changed. Not much. Just enough. Sugar, 30 days is not a thing you can do to a deal like this. There's a syndicate. There's a bank in New York with 60 people on it. Harold, there is a line on those pay slips called shrinkage recovery, and it is taking $41 a fortnight off the lowest paid people in this company, and I want to know who signed it. For seconds of silence. Then, warmly, all right now. Let me look into it. Let me make some calls and get back to you. And don't you go worrying about the mechanics of it. That's what you've got us for. He got back to her never. 19 hours later, Wendell Pratt was standing in the dock office at 9 o'clock at night with a laptop open, pulling badge records for the night crew. 50-something, gray at the temples, blazer, hands clasped in front of him, standing while the supervisor typed. 22 years with the Charlotte Mecklenburg Police before the company hired him. He did not raise his voice. He asked for things, and they arrived. He asked for 90 days of dock activity, every badge on floors 36 through 40 outside scheduled hours, and every new hire on the account since the first of the month. There were 2 new hires on that account, and one of them was badge 40118. Denise cleaned 6 floors that night with a cold feeling under her breastbone and understood, somewhere around 1 in the morning, that she had reached into a machine to point at something and the machine had closed on her hand. She learned about Harold for certain on the Friday, standing behind a mahogany service screen in the executive dining room on 39 at 7 in the evening, with an 1.5-inch gap between 2 panels. She used the words. That was Harold. She said shrinkage recovery to me on the telephone. Nobody says those 2 words. Nobody outside this floor and a payroll office in Greensboro even knows they exist. How did she sound? Clear. Clearer than she's sounded in 10 years, which is what's got me sat here. A pause. Then Marcus, what did you tell her? That I'd look into it and call her back. And will you call her back? Son, I'm sat in front of you. A chair creaked. That's the Whitakers for you. They're late and they're right. And being right that late is worse than being wrong. Harold, if she moves the trust position, the listing dies. And if the listing dies, we breach in April, and a workout desk sells this company for parts, and everybody who works nights for us finds out from a text message." His voice went up very slightly and cracked, the same crack she had heard through his office door. She'd be doing it to save them. That's the thing. She'd be doing it to save them, and it would be the single worst thing anybody's ever done to them. And there is no version of that conversation where I get to explain it to her, because I am the man who cut Curtis Ledbetter's crew from 3 to 1. "Then let me help you," said Harold Greer. In the next 90 seconds, 16 feet from a woman he had known for 28 years, Harold agreed to move a resolution at Friday's board meeting putting the trust's consent to a forced vote, and Marcus agreed to keep him on the board after the listing, in the vice chairman's seat, with the committee fees for 3 years. "You understand I'm not doing this against her," Harold said, and he sounded like he believed it, and he probably did. And that was the part that took the ground out from under her. "Marcus," she left, "you cannot hold a company from a lake house. You cannot take a thing 40,000 people are stood on and go away for 11 years, and then come back and put your hand on it, because you read something that upset you. She wasn't there. I was there. You were there. She wasn't there." Then 3 things happened over the weekend, and she could not stop any of them. The first was Yvette Doss, who had 2 write-ups in her file and needed the Thursday overtime, and who sat in the dock office on the Saturday morning while a supervisor said the word audit and said that whoever helped would be remembered. She gave one name. Denise found her at 2:10 on the Sunday morning in the stairwell between P2 and P3 with her hands over her face, crying the way people cry when they have already decided not to take it back, and sat down beside her and put an arm around her. And Yvette said, "I'm not a snake. I know you're not. I need Thursdays. I know you do, baby." The second was Isabel Reyes. At 11:12 on the Sunday night, Denise was standing at the compliance printer on 34 photographing a deduction exception summary that listed 611 employees by site code. And she looked up, and there was a woman in the doorway. Isabel Reyes was 47 and was the company's director of compliance. And she had come back to the office at 11 at night on a Sunday in a sweatshirt with a school logo on it, because she could not sleep, which she had not been able to do properly since about 2022. She had antacid tablets in her desk drawer and a resignation letter in her handbag that she had rewritten 14 times. Neither of them said anything for 6 or 7 seconds, which is an eternity in a lit room at night. Denise did not lower the phone. And that was instinct, and it was the right instinct. Because the moment you lower the phone, you are a thief. And if you do not lower it, you are something else that a person has to think about. Isabel looked at the printer, and at the phone, and then at Denise's face, properly, the way almost nobody in that building had looked at her face in 3 weeks. Then she turned round, and walked away down the corridor, and went home. The third arrived on Simone Carter's phone on the Monday morning, at 8:51. A calendar invitation. 15 minutes, 9:30 the following morning, which was her sleeping time, in a room on 26 called Discovery. Sender, People Services. Subject line, quick conversation. Nothing to prepare. She read it out loud to Denise on the phone that afternoon, laughing. Nothing to prepare. Baby, I've been here 9 years. I think it's the listing. I think they're doing employee shares, and they want somebody off nights for the picture. Watch me be in a photograph in a lobby holding a shrimp. Denise stood in a rented room and looked at herself in a mirror the size of a dinner plate. Simone, don't go in tomorrow. What? Call in. Say Andre's sick. Say anything. There was a pause, and then Simone's voice came back, careful and very slightly cold, because she was nobody's fool and never had been. D. Who are you? Denise had 2 seconds to decide, and what she said was the truth arranged so as to be a lie. I'm a woman who's been in enough of those rooms. When I was young, I worked for a company where they called it a quick conversation, and there was a folder on the table already printed. Silence long enough that she could hear a television somewhere in that apartment and a boy asking about socks. Well, that's not nothing. Then, briskly, but I'm going. Because if I call in sick on a Tuesday, I've got to write up for pattern absence by Friday. 9 years, D, and never a late. Whatever's in that folder, it can't be about me. It took 9 minutes. There were 3 of them in the room. A young woman from People Services with a laptop, a man from legal that Simone had never laid eyes on, and Wendell Pratt near the door with his hands clasped. They turned the laptop round. It was a badge report, 31 entries over 4 months. Everyone showing badge 33,107 clocking in at the dock between 8:40 and 8:55 and being recorded on the 30th floor reader at a time that made her worked hours longer than the count the supervisor had signed. Time theft. The man from legal used the phrase twice, both times with a small apologetic tilt of the head. Systematic overstatement of hours worked. Section 14, gross misconduct, effective immediately. Simone laughed out loud in that room, because she knew exactly what those 31 entries were. The badge reader on the dock is on the outside wall. The reader on 30 is by the service lift. When the flooring contractors had 33 and 34 in November and December, the service lift was on a lockout from 8:40 to 9:10 every night, and the crew had been told in writing, by the same supervisor who signed the hours, to badge in at the dock at their scheduled time and wait in the dock, because they were not permitted to stand in the lobby in uniform. 22 minutes, 31 times, waiting where they had been told to wait, for a lift they were not allowed to skip. She explained it clearly and twice, and asked them to pull the lockout log from building services, which took 40 seconds to find on any terminal in that tower, and gave them the name of the supervisor and the date. The young woman wrote it down. Then she said the determination had been reviewed and was final, and that Simone could raise a post-separation appeal through the portal within 30 days. The portal, Simone said afterwards, in a car park, looking straight ahead through the windscreen. You need a badge to get on the portal. They walked her out through the loading dock. That was the detail that finished Denise. Not the badge report. The route. Down in the passenger lift to the lobby. Then across and down the ramp and out through the dock on the Church Street side at 9:50 in the morning, when the day cleaners were unloading, and 4 people she had trained stood there with a pallet of paper towels and had to watch it. Pratt walked half a step behind with his hands clasped. She carried a box with a mug in it and a phone charger and a plastic plant that somebody had given her when Andre started school, and one of the men on that pallet said her name out loud, and she did not turn around, because she was not going to do it in front of them. I need my job, she said, when Denise asked what she needed. No, I mean it. That's the whole list. She turned the mug round in the box. Rent's fine, I've got March. It's the insurance. When does it end? Midnight on the last day of the month. That's Thursday. Denise Whitaker had owned a company that insured 39,000 people and had never once sat down and worked out what the coverage actually meant in a kitchen at the end of a month. She learned it in 72 hours, the way the people who worked for her had always learned it, at a counter, in a queue, with a card in her hand. On the Thursday, the last day of February, Simone Carter walked into a pharmacy she had used for 9 years with Andre beside her reading the label on a bottle of shampoo, and asked for a 30-day supply at cash price with no plan. Denise stood at the end of the counter by the blood pressure machine, 3 feet away. The pharmacist was a heavy young man with a beard and a badge that said Dominic, and he was gentle, and he was useless, and Denise would remember his face for the rest of her life. He wrote the numbers on a slip of paper and turned it round, because you do not say a number like that out loud in a shop. 2 vials of insulin at cash price, 1 box of infusion sets, 1 box of 3 sensors, which was 10 days short of a month because they only had 3. $681.40. Okay, Simone said. Let's do the insulin and the sets, and I'll come back for the sensors. $432. She put a card down. Denise watched a 34-year-old woman put her hand flat on the counter beside the reader, the way you do when you are willing an outcome. It's let me run it again. Sometimes it's the terminal. He ran it again. Try it as a debit? Sometimes it goes through as a debit. He tried it as a debit. Andre had come round the end of the aisle with the shampoo still in his hand and was watching his mother's back. He was 9 years old. He understood the mechanics of that moment better than most adults understand a mortgage, and he did the thing that Denise carried afterwards worse than anything else in this story. He turned around quietly and put the shampoo back on the shelf. In the right place. Facing the right way. Do the one vial, Simone said. Just the one vial and the sets. 298. Just the one vial then. Denise Whitaker had $11 in her uniform pocket, $411,000 in an account she could not touch with a card in that shop without ending everything, and 58% of a corporation that had taken $41 a fortnight off that woman for 4 years. She stood beside a blood pressure machine and did nothing. And the reason she did nothing was that Wendell Pratt had pulled 90 days of badge records 9 days earlier, and she was one of 2 new hires on that account. And if a night cleaner put $600 on a card at a Walgreens on the last day of the month with a terminated employee standing next to her, she was finished, and so was any chance of that audit. And so was Curtis Ledbetter and Yvette Doss, and every one of the 22 names in her notebook. She had made the arithmetic. That is what she told herself, driving home. The arithmetic was correct, and there is a kind of correctness that is not worth the paper.